There were 19 people in the pen that morning, and not one of them had ever heard their own bond read aloud, and I had about 4 minutes before Master Braddock's men reached me. Clause 11, I said, loudly, to 19 people who had all been told to keep quiet. The maintenance of the bonded, food, lodging, cloth, and physic, shall be charged against the bonded's account. I looked up. That means he feeds you and then bills you for it. Clause 12. Where the account is not discharged at the term's end, the term shall be extended by such period as the court shall certify. That means if the bill is bigger than your labour, and he sets both, your 7 years become 14. And then 21. A woman at the back of the pen said, "That's not what they told us." "No," I said, "it never is. That is my entire profession." And then Braddock's men got to the rail. 9 weeks earlier, I had walked into the Saltmere Bond Court on my own 2 feet, in another girl's place, and fainted in front of 400 people before I could say a word. My name is Birgit, and I read documents aloud to people who cannot read them. That is a real trade, and a small one. There is one of me in most districts, the letter writer, the reader, the woman at the end of the market who will write your petition or read your summons, or work out what the miller's contract actually says, for a penny, or for nothing if it is bad news. Because you do not charge a woman a penny to tell her she has lost her house. I was 27 that autumn, in Nethercote, which is a town of about 900 on the Salt Road, and I had been doing it for 11 years, and in 11 years I had read out perhaps 200 bond papers to weeping families. So I want it understood, before anything else in this account, I knew exactly what a bond was. Better than anybody in Nethercote. Better, it turned out, than almost anybody in the territory. Here is the law, plainly, because everything that follows sits on it. In Saltmere, a debt that cannot be paid may be discharged by bond. The debtor's labour is auctioned at the Court of Bonds for a term of years. The buyer pays the debt outright. The debtor serves the term and walks out clear. It is 400 years old. It is chartered. The Court of Bonds is not a Crown Court. It is a chartered one. Held by the bond rights under a grant the Crown cannot revoke without proving cause. Which is a distinction that meant nothing to me at all, until it meant everything. And it is called the mating auction by every living soul in Saltmere, because of what a great many buyers do with the people they buy, which is not in the law, and has never needed to be. That is what I knew on the morning of the auction. It is why I was afraid. It is also why I was there. Nan Halloway was 15 years old. Her father had died owing 41 silver to a factor in Saltmere town, and the debt passed to the household the way debts do, and her mother had nothing. And the summons came to Nethercote in the spring, and Nan's mother brought it to me. Because that is what you do. You bring the paper to the woman who reads. I read it to her at my own table. I told her what a bond was, and what a term was, and what the maintenance clause meant, as far as I understood it then, and I watched a woman work out that her 15-year-old daughter was going to be sold in a pen in Saltmere town. And I sat there with the paper in my hand, and something in me simply stopped being able to do it. There is a provision. It is old, and it is barely used, and I only knew about it because I read the whole charter once, years ago, out of professional bad temper. A bond may be answered by a substitute of full age who takes the term in the debtor's place, provided the substitution is made with the court's knowledge and consent. I did not tell the court. That is the crime. I want it on the record now, in my own words. Before anybody else tells you, what I did was unlawful. And I knew it was unlawful when I did it. And I did it anyway. I went to Saltmere in Nan Halloway's name, with Nan Halloway's summons in my hand, and I let a clerk write down a 15-year-old girl's name against a woman of 7 and 20. And I did it because the alternative was Nan in that pen, and I had read 200 of those papers, and I knew what a pen was for. So when the story says forced to attend an auction she never wanted to be part of, the story is half right. I did not want it. Nobody has ever wanted it. But nobody forced me. I walked in on my own 2 feet, and I have never once let anybody call it anything else. I fainted because of the rail. That is the honest reason, and it is not a noble one. I had been in that hall for 2 hours by then, in the pen, with the others, and it was hot, and I had not eaten since the day before, and I had spent the whole of the morning being extremely calm in the way you are calm when you have decided a thing and are simply waiting to survive it. And then they called the lot before mine, and the buyer came up to the rail to look, and he looked along the row the way you look along a row, and I understood, properly in my body for the first time, that in about 4 minutes a man was going to do that to me. The floor came up. That is all. There was a great roaring, and the light went yellow, and I went down against the rail, and I did not hear the bid. 400 people heard it. It came, they tell me, before I had finished falling, a single voice from the gallery, the full sum, no haggling, in the flat tone of a man ending an argument. I woke on a bench in an anteroom with a woman I did not know holding a cup to my mouth, and the first thing I said, apparently, was who bought me. And the woman would not answer. And so I said it again, and she said, "The king did love." I want to be honest about what I felt, because it was not relief. It was worse. It was considerably worse. Because I had spent 11 years reading these documents to people, and I knew before anybody told me exactly what had just happened to me. And it was not a rescue. A bond is a bond. There is no clause in that charter that makes it a different instrument in a king's hands. Somebody had paid 41 silver for a term of 7 years of my labour, and the fact that the somebody wore a crown did not alter one word of the paper. And I sat on a bench in an anteroom in Saltmere town with my head between my knees, and understood that I had been bought by the most powerful man in the north, and that the law now said he could do very nearly whatever he liked with me for. 7 years. He came in about a quarter of an hour later, and I got up because you get up, and he said the first thing that has ever made me trust him. "Sit down, please, and then, before I could ask anything at all, I want to tell you what I hold and what I cannot do about it, because I think you already know, and I would rather we both said it out loud in the first 5 minutes than pretend for a fortnight." King Ferris of Saltmere was perhaps 35, and did not look like a man who had won anything. "I hold a bond," he said. 7 years, bought at the Court of Bonds this morning. That instrument is exactly as valid in my hands as it would be in any other man's in that hall, and I am not going to insult you by suggesting otherwise. Then tear it up. I have thought about nothing else since I bid. He sat down opposite me, which put a king of the north on a bench in an anteroom. If I discharge the bond without the debt paid, the debt revives, and it is unpaid, and the court re-auctions it within the month. If I pay the debt and free you, the court holds that a bond bought and released by the buyer is forfeit rather than discharged, and a forfeit bond returns to the block. I have had the charter read to me twice this morning by 2 men who hate each other, and they agree. His jaw worked. There is no door in it. The only lawful way out of a bond in Saltmere is to serve the term. That is by design. I have known it was by design for 4 years, and I have not been able to do one thing about it. I sat on that bench and did the only thing I know how to do, which is read. "Give me the paper," I said. He gave me the paper. Not a copy, the bond itself, the original instrument, into my own hands, in the first quarter of an hour, and I sat there holding the document that owned me, and understood that he had just made himself unable to enforce it. Because a bond cannot be enforced by a man who cannot produce it. "That's yours," he said. "Keep it. Burn it if you like. It changes nothing legally, and I would rather you had the burning of it than me." He stood. "You are not coming to Saltmere Keep. You are going home to Nethercote, tonight, in a crown cart, and you will go on doing your own work, and the term will run on paper and nowhere else, and I will send a clerk once a quarter to certify service, so the court has nothing to seize on. That is the whole of what I can lawfully do, and it is not enough, and I know it is not enough." "Why did you bid?" He was already at the door, and he stopped. "Because you went down," said the King of Saltmere, and the man at that rail did not step back. "I went home to Nethercote that night with a bond in my satchel and my own front door key in my hand, and I did not know what to do with any of it. He wrote first. That was the shape of the first month, a king writing to a woman he legally owned, with excruciating care, about nothing at all, the certification schedule, the clerk's name, a question about whether the crown cart had been adequate. Every letter read like a man walking through a room full of glass. I wrote back because I am not built to leave a letter unanswered, and somewhere in the second month it stopped being about the schedule. I want to be careful how I tell this, because the shape of it matters more than anything sweet I could say. There was a document between us that gave one of us total power over the other, and neither of us was ever able to forget it for a single hour, and that is not a romantic condition. It is a poisonous one. What we did about it was the only thing that made any of it possible. He never came to Nethercote. Not once, in 5 months. He wrote and I wrote, and twice he sent for me, sent and asked, with a clerk instructed to say plainly that a refusal carried no consequence, and the first time I refused, deliberately, to find out what would happen. And what happened was a very short letter that said only, understood. Nothing changes. F. I went the second time. That is what I would tell you about Ferris of Saltmere if you only let me tell you one thing. He was so careful that it was almost funny. And he was that careful for 5 months without once being thanked for it. And when I finally asked him why he did not simply behave normally, he said that a man holding a bond does not get to have a normal, and that he had decided at the anteroom bench that he would rather be absurd for 7 years than be a man she could not refuse. I fell in love with him over paperwork and an 11-mile distance, which is not what the ballads say, and is what happened. There was a thing he said in the 4th month that I did not think about properly for another 2. He was telling me about his 4th attempt to move against the court. He had tried 4 times in 6 years and been beaten 4 times, because the charter can only be revoked for cause and nobody had ever produced one. And he said, tiredly, that the worst of it was that everyone he consulted said the same thing, that the bond system was hard but sound, that it discharged real debts, that people served their terms and came out clear. "Do you know anybody who came out clear?" I asked. He opened his mouth and stopped, and did not answer. I did not know yet that a question I asked to be difficult was the only question in Saltmere nobody had ever thought to ask out loud. If you want to find out what a woman who reads contracts for a living finds when she finally goes and counts, and what it costs to accuse a court of a crime you have to confess to committing yourself, stay with me. What I found in that registry is the reason there is no court of bonds in Saltmere anymore. I went to the registry in the 6th month, because I could not stop thinking about a man opening his mouth and not answering. Bonds are public. They must be. An instrument that binds a person's labour is unenforceable unless it is recorded, and so the Court of Bonds keeps a registry open to any subject who asks, in a cold room off the courthouse, and in 11 years of reading bond papers to weeping families, it had never once occurred to me to go and read the other end of them. I asked for the discharges. The clerk was perfectly obliging. That is a detail I have never got over. He was helpful. He had no idea. He brought me the discharge book and left me with it, and I sat in a cold room with 40 years of the Court of Bonds, and I counted. 40 years. Something over 9,000 bonds entered. Discharged, served out, term completed, debtor released clear, 11 in 40 years. Out of 9,000. Something in me went very still and very clear. I sat in that room for 4 hours and worked out how. Because the how is the whole of it, and it is not complicated once you see it. And every single piece of it is written on the face of the document I had been reading aloud for 11 years. Clause 11. The maintenance of the bonded. Food, lodging, cloth, and physic is charged against the bonded's account. Clause 12, where the account is not discharged at the term's end, the term is extended by such period as the court shall certify. The buyer sets the value of the labour. The buyer sets the cost of the maintenance. And the court, which takes a fee on every certification, every extension, every renewal, in perpetuity, certifies the arithmetic. There has never been a bond in Saltmere that was meant to end. A 7-year term becomes 11, and 11 becomes 19, and 19 becomes a life, and every single extension is individually explicable, and individually lawful, and individually certified for a fee, and no one had ever counted them together, because each family only ever saw their own. I had read 200 of those papers aloud. I had read Clause 11 and Clause 12 out loud, in my own voice, to weeping people, 200 times. And I had never once put them beside each other and asked what they did in company. Because I was reading the document to them and not against it, and because I had believed, the way you believe the ground, that a term is a term. That is the part I have had to make my peace with, and I have not entirely. I brought Ferris the Count, and he was quiet for a very long time. 11, he said, in 40 years. That is cause. He said it slowly, like a man testing ice. That is finally cause. Birgit, 4 times I have gone at that charter with nothing, and the answer has always been that the system is hard, but honest, and produce your evidence. This is the evidence. This is 9,000 people. There's a difficulty. Tell me. To bring the case, the Crown has to audit the bonds. All of them. Every account, every extension, every certification, which means every bonded person's circumstances become public record. What they owed. Why. Who bought them, and what he charged them for. 9,000 people, and a great many of them, are still alive and still serving, and there is no way to prove this without laying every one of their lives open in a courtroom. He looked at me. And there is a second difficulty, I said, which is mine, and which is worse, and which you are not going to like at all. Because my bond was going to be in that audit, and my bond says Nan Halloway, of Nethercote, 15 years. I could not bring a case against the Court of Bonds for fraudulent certification while standing on a bond I had obtained by fraud. Braddock would find it inside a week. It is the first thing I would have looked for, and the moment he found it, the case became the work of a proven liar, and 9,000 people went back to being individually explicable. So I would have to say it first, in open court. That I substituted myself for a child, without the court's knowledge or consent, which is an offence under the Charter, and which I committed knowingly. And if my substitution was void, the original bond stood. Nan Halloway, 15 years old, back on the block. That is the arithmetic I sat with for 4 days, and I will not pretend I was brave about any of it. The only way to save her was to win, because if the charter fell there would be no court to send her back to, and if I confessed and lost. I put a child in that pen with my own mouth. I went to Nethercote, and I told her mother. All of it, plainly, at the same table where I had read her the summons, because I have never in my life been able to make a decision for somebody in a room they were not in. She let me finish. Then she asked me one question, which was whether I thought we would win. And I told her the truth, which was that I did not know. Then read it to her, she said. The way you read it to me. And let her say. So I read a 15-year-old girl the clause that might put her back on the block, and the count that might save 9,000 people, and I sat there while she worked it out. Nan Halloway said, "How many people is 9,000? I told her it was more than everyone she had ever met, 4 times over. Then do it, she said. And then, because she was 15, but you have to win. Braddock moved before we filed. His first move was elegant, and it very nearly ended us. He did not attack me. He petitioned the Crown Court to have the bond of Nan Halloway called in for irregularity, on his own motion, sorrowfully. Having noticed a discrepancy in the age recorded. He was going to expose the substitution himself, first, so that it looked like the Court of Bonds policing its own, and my confession looked like a woman caught rather than a woman speaking. He was 4 days ahead of us, and he lost those 4 days to a clerk with a fever, which is the only piece of pure luck in this entire account, and I am not going to pretend it was anything else. We filed first. By 2 days. His second move was the registry. The discharge book, 40 years, 9,000 entries, 11 discharges, was court property, held in court premises, and the moment the case was filed, he moved to have the registry sealed as evidence in his own custody pending examination. It was a perfectly ordinary application. It was also the end of everything, because a book in Braddock's custody is a book that develops problems, and I had counted it once, from memory, with no copy. Ulrich, the king's second, who I had met twice, and who had said perhaps 40 words to me in total, took 11 men to that cold room at 4 a.m. on the day the sealing order came down, and copied the discharge book by hand, all of it in 6 hours, and had the copies witnessed by 2 magistrates before the order was served at noon. He has never once let me thank him for it. He says it was a night's work. It was the whole case. The hearing ran 11 days, and I am not going to give you all of it, because most of it was arithmetic, and the arithmetic is why we won, and it does not make a story. What I will give you is the confession, because that was mine. I stood up on the second day, before Braddock could do it for me, and I told the court that the bond entered against Nan Halloway of Nethercote was served by me, that I had substituted myself without the court's knowledge or consent, that this was an offence under the Charter, and that I had done it knowingly, having read the Charter, being fully aware of what I was doing. And then I said the only sentence I had prepared. I am the woman who reads these papers aloud in my district, my lords. I have read Clause 11 and Clause 12 to 200 families, and I never once put them side by side. And I am here, because I finally did. If this court wants to disregard the count, because the woman who made it is a criminal, then I invite you to have somebody honest go and count it again. It will come out at 11. They did not disregard it. But they did convict me. On the second week, on my own admission, which was correct, I had told them I did it, and I had done it, and I have never once argued with that. The last day was the auction. The court sat while the court ran, which was Braddock's own choice and his last mistake. He had a scheduled auction on the 11th day, and he refused to postpone it, because postponing looked like fear, and because he was still confident. And there is a provision, old, barely used, in the same charter, that a person about to be bonded is entitled to have the instrument read to them in full before signing, by any person of their choosing. Nobody had ever exercised it, not once in 40 years. Because the people in that pen could not read, and did not know they could ask, and nobody in that building was going to tell them. I walked into the pen on the morning of the 11th day and I read it out. 19 people, clause 11, and then clause 12, and then what they do together, in plain words, in my flat market voice, the way I have read 1,000 documents to people who cannot. Braddock's men got to the rail about 4 minutes in, and by then it did not matter, because a woman at the back had already said that's not what they told us, and once one person in a pen says that out loud, you cannot put it back. Not one of the 19 signed. That was what finished it, not my count, and not my confession, the empty pen. The Court of Bonds of Saltmere held an auction on the 11th day of a hearing into its own conduct, and sold nothing at all, in front of the Crown Court, because 19 people had finally heard what was in the paper. The charter was revoked in the spring for cause. 9,000 bonds were called in and audited over 2 years. And it was every bit as ugly as I had promised. Thousands of private ruins read into a public record, and there are families in Saltmere who have never forgiven me for it, and who are right not to. 6,000 and some were discharged outright. The rest were reduced to their true terms, which were mostly served twice over already. Braddock was not hanged. There was no single crime. A certification is a judgment, and a judgment is not a fraud. And he argued to the last that 40 years of extensions were 40 years of honest arithmetic. What took him was the fee schedule, which showed that the court earned on every extension and nothing at all on a discharge. And once 400 people understood that the only outcome the court was never paid for was a person walking free, there was no room left in that hall for the argument. Now the cost, and it is not the one anybody expects. I have a conviction. It stands. It has always stood, and it always will. Ferris will not pardon me. I want to be very clear that this was my position first, and that he came to it after, and that we have argued about it perhaps 4 times in 2 years, and I have won every time. A king who pardons the woman he is going to marry, for the exact offence that founded the case that broke a 400-year-old charter, hands every enemy of that judgment the only argument they need, that the count was a criminal's count, and the Crown wiped her clean when it was done with her. So I am the Luna of Saltmere, and I am a convicted woman, and both of those things are read out at every formal occasion, because the clerk is required to read the roll. And I have watched visiting lords not know where to look for 2 years, and I have decided that is entirely their difficulty. And the second cost, which is heavier, and which nobody puts in the story. I did not save Nan Halloway with courage. I gambled her. I stood in front of a 15-year-old girl and told her that the only way out was to risk her. And she said yes, because she was 15 and I was the woman who reads. And there has never in my life been a moment I have wanted back the way I want that one. It came right. That does not make it a good thing that I did. I have stopped trying to make those two agree. He asked me in the summer, in Nethercote, at my own table, with the bond on the table between us. It was still in my satchel, all that time. 2 years. He had given it to me in an anteroom in the first quarter of an hour, and I had kept it because it was mine to keep, and after the charter fell, it became a piece of paper about nothing at all, and neither of us had ever mentioned it again. He put it on the table and said, "That has been void since the spring, and I have not asked you anything since the day I bought it, and I want you to notice the order of those 2 facts before I say the next part. You've been counting. I have been counting," said the King of Saltmere. "The number of days between the moment I stopped having any power over you whatsoever and the moment I asked, and it is 411, and I would like it on the record that I waited. You could have asked in the spring. I could have asked in the spring, and you would have said yes in the spring," he said, "and I would have spent the rest of my life wondering whether the woman in the anteroom could have said no. Ask me anything else, and I will answer it in a heartbeat. Not that. That one I was willing to wait 400 days to be certain of. I kissed him first, at my own table, in my own house, in the town I had never left. It was brief, and it was warm, and it settled something in me that had been braced since the morning I let a clerk write a 15-year-old's name against mine. 2 years on, I still read for Nethercote. Every market day, at the end of the row, for a penny, or for nothing when it is bad news. There is a fine argument about it roughly twice a year, and I have won all of them. A Luna who has stopped reading contracts for people who cannot is a Luna who has forgotten the entire reason she is one. There are 9 of us now, across the territory, readers, paid out of the Crown's purse, 1 in every district, whose only office is that no person in Saltmere signs an instrument that has not been read aloud to them in plain words first. It is in the law. It is 9 words long, and I wrote them. No paper binds a person to whom it was not read. Nan Halloway is 17 and lives with me half the year, and she is learning to read, badly and furiously. And she has announced that she intends to have my post one day, and I have told her she will have to wait. Ulrich still refuses to be thanked for the copying. It has become a running battle. At the wedding he was presented, on Ferris's order and entirely against his will, with a bound copy of the discharge book in his own hand, and he was so angry about it that he could not speak, and he has it on his wall. And I still have the bond. Void, worthless, 7 years of a 15-year-old girl's name, and a woman of 27's handwriting, in a box in Nethercote, and not in the keep. I take it out perhaps twice a year, and read Clause 11, out loud, in my own voice, to nobody at all. I still wonder about the clerk in the registry, honestly, more than I wonder about Braddock. Braddock built a machine that never let anybody out, and took a fee on every year of it, and there is no mystery in a man like that. But there was a clerk in a cold room who fetched me the discharge book without a second thought, and who had been fetching it for years, and who could have counted it himself in an afternoon any day of his working life, and never did. Nobody ever asked him to. Nobody ever asked anybody to. Tell me in the comments what you think that is, whether he never counted because he could not bear to, or because it genuinely never occurred to him that a book he carried every week was worth adding up. I have decided I do not know, and that the second one frightens me considerably more than the first. Comment Clause 11 if you want to hear what Ferris's wolf did the first time it was brought into the Court of Bonds after the Charter fell, and what it did to Master Braddock's chair. And if you want more nights like this one. A king who bought a woman and spent 411 days making certain she could refuse him. A reader who never once put 2 clauses side by side until it was almost too late. And 19 people in a pen who heard the truth in time. Stay close. There is more of Saltmere left to tell. Where are you listening from tonight? I would love to know.